Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, Jess and I are happy to spend the next hour or so with you talking about Streambank bioengineering. And I'm going to shut my camera off to keep the bandwidth gods happy. But I will make sure to let me know if my audio is bad, but I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Jess and I plan to take turns walking you through our content. And I suspect we should have a few minutes at the end for any questions. I liked how at the end of Heather's talk, she discussed tying the stream within the culvert into the stream outside. And I think the way to do this and to stabilize the stream banks after a project is via bioengineering. In recognition to the diverse backgrounds of this workshop's large group of participants, we plan to keep our content pretty high level, and we'll highlight the most common techniques utilized in association with stream crossing projects in the state. We don't necessarily intend to provide a step-by-step installation or deep technical specifications on the techniques, but instead we'll give you a more general context of the technique and provide a few considerations or examples of use. And I'll dive into this more at the end of the presentation, but if you're interested in just much more in-depth information on streambank bioengineering, there are a couple upcoming workshops devoted to that topic in Alaska coming this spring and also this fall. So next slide, please, Jess. I'd like to start by sharing this commonly used definition of bioengineering. It was provided by Allen and Leach in their 1997 technical report titled Bioengineering for Streambank Erosion Control. I think interestingly, bioengineering is very old in practice. Its origins can be traced back as early as 28 BC in China, where riverbanks were stabilized with large baskets woven with willow, hemp, or bamboo and filled with rocks. One of the earliest written accounts of bioengineering is from 1791, where Woltman wrote about using live stakes to vegetate and stabilize stream banks. Next slide, please. So here we list a few advantages in using bioengineering. In both the short term and long term, bioengineering provides habitat for all manner of terrestrial and aquatic life. I think a good context for this was provided yesterday in a couple of the talks. By and large, bioengineering is more cost effective than hard engineered solutions, primarily because most of the techniques don't require heavy equipment, but also because many of the vegetative materials can be sourced or even collected locally. Bioengineering is sustainable and it becomes part of the landscape. The vegetation becomes part of the plant community's succession, and the techniques evolve with the stream, adjusting to flows and meandering. Plants really do the heavy lifting, and the root structure associated with successfully established projects create a strong matrix with the soil that only increase in resilience over time as the plants continue to grow. Considering aesthetics, like the presence of green living material over rock or hardened surfaces tends to be more eye appealing to most folks. And as a last point here on this slide, in Alaska, bioengineering solutions are often required depending on your project parameters. But particulars on this are a different talk, and that's coming your way tomorrow. Next slide, please. For all the advantages I've mentioned, bioengineering is not a great solution for every situation. Highly alluvial or unstable systems are not always a great fit for bioengineering. I have a photo here of the Resurrection River in Seward, and you can see the highly braided nature of the river and how it's constantly moving its alluvium and creating and recreating its channels. This type of system can be too flashy and too dynamic for the vegetation to establish and serve its stabilizing purpose. A few other scenarios where bioengineering may not fit is when you're dealing with high velocities or when you're trying to protect critical infrastructure, maybe roads, bridges, or development, or when natural stream movement cannot be tolerated. And a last point here, bioengineering also may not be a good solution if you cannot protect the project from negative impacts. It might be humans, livestock, ATV use, etc. Next slide, please. A quick case in point, here's a photo that we often refer to as a dwelling on the Matanuska River that once sat more than a quarter mile from the river. Bioengineering wouldn't be a feasible solution in this situation, both due to the likelihood or lack of likelihood of success and high cost. A much more feasible solution would be to work with these folks, move the structure, and create a situation that just allows the river to continue its natural migration across the floodplain. Next slide, please. This is a short and very incomplete list of things a practitioner should consider prior to utilizing bioengineering as part of a stream crossing or streambank project. I cannot overemphasize the importance of engaging expertise from other disciplines when planning and implementing your projects. Within your interdisciplinary team, which may include engineers, plant ecologists, biologists, soil scientists, hydrologists, or more, make sure to consider all aspects of the system and the site on which you're working. And not just at a single point in time, but also consider your system and your site throughout all the seasons and over a period of time. This level of planning is necessary to help you select the technique or suite of techniques best suited to the project. Don't overlook the importance of soils, your plant hardiness zone, native vegetative material sourcing, and site prep needs. Next slide, please. I'd like to mention that one cannot install a project and walk away. Maintenance and care, protection, and a solid monitoring plan are all necessary to ensure success. Make sure to have a plan to respond to the unexpected and have specifics in place on how to repair or replace elements of a project should you have failures. And definitely have a plan for how any repairs will be funded. And next slide, please.
All right, so I think this is where I'm taking over.
It is, yep.
All right, so thanks, Emily, for giving kind of an overview here. So I'm gonna kind of go through the different types of stream bank like stability or stabilizations that you can use in revegetation techniques that are most common within fish crossings here. And they also work for stream banks, but so to stabilize the toe, we'll talk about root wads and coir logs. And then for revegetation, we'll talk about vegetative mats, hydroseeding, trenched willows, and brush layers. So this is an overview. We'll start with root wads, kind of the most robust bioengineering technique that we currently have. As you can see, we've kind of got just a side view of what root wads look like installed with a brush layer. So over here, you've got your ordinary high water. You've got a brush layer, which is just a soil encapsulated lift with willows and then a vegetative mat up top. So when you're doing root wads must be spruce trees. And the reason why we say that is that spruce trees don't rot as quickly as other trees. They hold up. They need to be living, not beetle-killed trees or highly infested trees. We're seeing a lot of people asking to use beetle-killed trees in South Central. One of the reasons why we say they need to be alive and not infested with beetles is that you think about the spruce beetles, they'll kind of eat their way through a log. And lots of times that puts a lot of pressure right here and you'll just bust your root fan. Then you're not pinned together. So one large flood event could take away the fan or cause issues within this. Like I said, your root fan needs to be at about ordinary high, the middle of it. So you're kind of shooting for ordinary highs. So sometimes you might actually have to have like a level on site, especially if you've done a complete culvert replacement or fish passage replacement, because by then you've really kind of tore up the whole area. So just knowing where your ordinary high is. This is one of the more expensive techniques, and it is the most expensive technique to do, and it's just because it requires large equipment. You've got to have rock on site. And we recommend, Emily and I, for our program, that people explore softer techniques first. It's not always plausible, and depending on where your stream bank and fish passage is, it might not necessarily work. So in this picture, this is an anchorage along Campbell Creek. And what we're doing is we've stabilized the toe of the slope. It's providing long-term protection because behind this is actually the Campbell Creek Trail. And really, root wads, all they do is stabilize the toe, and then they just provide a base for the vegetation to grow. So as you can see here, we've got a brush layer on here, and you've got willows already starting to take off. So there are several different ways or different revegetation techniques you can use on top of root wads. So once you get your root wad complete, you'll have a cribbing and your root wad installed, and you can do several different types of reveg. In this particular case, here's just a drawing of a vegetative mat. These can be, depending on what your project goals are and what your stream looks like, sometimes it's easy just to throw a vegetative mat on and you've completed your revegetation. Other times, maybe you want to add, a few other elements and try to get some willows established. So in this case, you can do a set of trench willows, and here we have another veg mat attached. One thing to consider too when looking and using these is that root wads have a lifespan of about 25 to 50 years. Emily and I have actually worked with the landowners on the Kasilof River that I believe they installed their root wads, their first set of root wads in 1995. Is that correct, Emily?
Yep.
And yeah, their root wads are still holding. They look excellent. They're still doing the job that they want, that they were hoping it would do. And yeah, willow is excellent to put on here because as your root fans and root wads start to break down, hopefully by that point your willow stems will have grown and you'll have robust willows that'll hold the soil in place. And again, like I said, multiple different types of revegetation techniques. This is just a brush layer, and the brush layer will just kind of help you reach your elevation a little quicker. So sometimes we'll see these with 2 or 3 brush layers on top. Sometimes you'll just see one and then your willows and vegetative mat on top. I've seen them here in the anchorage area along the Campbell Creek again, where they've done just one brush layer just to get the willows in, a 3-foot wide veg mat, and then hydro seed behind. So it really depends on your site and your project goals in determining what type of revegetation technique you want to use on top. So I'm just gonna kind of walk through a case study here. It's an interesting case study that we had up in Fairbanks. So this is the Rosehip campground along the Chena River. So for years they had a road that was running right next to the Chena River. So this, where my little arrow is actually the downstream. So this picture's taken from the upstream side looking downstream. And you can tell they had some erosion going on of the road here. They've got little cones, I'm assuming that's what it is, to kind of keep people away from the area. And we've got our SWIP requirements here. So that was September of 2014. So that must have been early September. Keep an eye on these trees. By late September, they had another flooding event come through, and they actually lost a lot of those trees, and they've started to cave over. They've lost a lot more of the road. So again, this is just August. And the one thing I would like to point out, roads and structures, I'm not a road engineer, but they are very compact soils that are put on roads, and there's no way for tree roots to go through there or vegetation. I like to just point out how lacking of vegetation there is. Even after a full year of growing, there's still no vegetation after that first flood. And so 2016, we've just got another site looking at it. It's just another photo by now. They've actually blocked off this, so people actually aren't even allowed to walk down past this because of the dangers with the road. So in fall October of 2016, DNR State Parks, Fish and Game, and Help with Fish and Wildlife Service came together and decided it was time to do something. In this case, installed root wads. And so you can see here, all of the root wads are installed, and the cribbing, the rock-filled cribbing, is actually being installed also. This log right here is actually called the anchor log, which you can see up here. So this is just a top-down view and a header log. And then this drawing just kind of shows from a cribbing to your fine biodegradable mesh, soil, and then the different types of like revegetation you could put on top. So here's a couple more shots. We've got our silt fence in, and then in this particular shot, we're looking upriver. They've put one brush layer in. You can see some willows here. Their brush or soil lift, and then another row of trench or of willows. And now they're coming back and just preparing the site for adding a vegetative mat on top. And they elected to just use a vegetative mat that was as wide as the skid steer. So they just went with the skid steer harvest vegetative mat that was further than 50 feet away from the site. And so they just harvested it, brought it in. I'm guessing that skid steer's bucket is maybe 6 foot wide. And so their veg mat is coming 6 foot wide. And one thing I like to point out is they've got a lot of trees that they were able to harvest that hopefully will take off and help. So getting a really robust vegetative mat really helps on projects such as this. So this is after it was complete. So, you know, we're talking maybe 24, 48 hours after the whole project was actually complete. So you can see we've got our root wads here. We got willows, a brush layer, more willows, and our vegetative mat. So I like to jump to this picture. This is July of 2018. So this is giving it almost 2 growing seasons. So you can tell that's all filled in really nicely. We've got some pretty tall willows. We've got a lot of fireweed. Things are looking really good. This is holding up really well. One thing to point out is that DNR did a really great job of putting up a fence to keep people off of this while it gave it a chance to grow. There's still a walking path back here, but they did a great job with that. So I just kind of like to give a before. This is looking downstream. So upstream of the project looking down, October of 2016, and this is July of 2018. One thing that Emily did point out is, you know, keep in mind care for your project and thinking about human access. So many of you may know this or may not. The Chino River, especially this area, is a renowned grayling fishing area. And so as I learned, this particular area is just phenomenal grayling fishing. And so we have people who are coming in, walking on top of our bioengineering to fish for grayling. So that's why our bioengineering cloth is pulled out, and a lot of these willows right here are dead. And you can start seeing we've got social trails coming back through the vegetation. So root wads have been used in many different aspects and areas. And so with this particular case, this is Fish Creek out in the Matsu Valley. And from what I understand, prior to doing work, this was just kind of a muddy mess. We had ATVs going through, people walking through it. And so they wanted to kind of put the channel back to where it needed to be, give it some constraints. And so what they ended up doing was they put root wads in a brush layer here. And the point of the root wads was to prevent ATVs from going over and through the creek. And they even took it a step further and put up fencing to really keep people and ATVs off the area. So DOT is also starting to use some of these fish-friendly techniques, such as root wads. This is actually along the Sterling Highway. It's right across from the Kenai Wildlife Visitor Center. So it's just a side channel of the Kenai. When the water comes up during the summertime, they've got a side channel. They put some fairly large rocks into the area, but you can see your header log here. We've got 2 brush layers. Knowing that this is protecting infrastructure, they've actually added, like I said, more rock. And normally when Emily and I do this, we don't add this line of rock, But again, this is protecting infrastructure. So DOT put more rock in. I applaud them for even incorporating fish-friendly techniques into this. So these techniques also work. Again, this is another Chino River, and I like this one to use this photo because you can see this is very fine silt, and root wads work perfect in this fine silt. This particular animal is having problems, and this is a vertical drop. According to my coworker, it was probably 10 feet straight down from here. But they were able to get in and get some root wads installed. A lot of the material, like Emily was saying, the material can be harvested locally. This particular gentleman actually harvests his root wads and his vegetative mat from the airstrip he was building. So he knew he wanted an airstrip, so he just harvested his materials from the airstrip. Most people they don't believe that this holds up well to ice scouring. I wish I had the video of this. This landowner actually sent Mitch and I the video showing that these ice sheets were just bouncing off and not even touching the root wads because the root wads had slowed the velocity along the river enough that when these ice sheets would come down, the outside velocity would just pick them up and spin them. So they were just spinning as they were going downstream. And so this is about a year after his project was complete. And you can see we don't have as much woody vegetation, but that's just because he laid vegetative mat down, but it's still held up really well and is growing. I like to bring this slide in. This is again a Kenai River slide. One thing to consider is anytime you're doing any sort of tow protection or revegetation, you need to think about your tie-in points. And in this case, this root wad was just kind of left hanging. They didn't have a really good tie-in point, but they just stopped the project. They probably should have continued the project a little further downriver, maybe talking with their neighbors to see if they could continue downriver, or tying in another technique if they needed to. The other thing they could do is kind of take this fan, instead of having it face the river, they can start having it face downstream a little bit. So this is the water's flowing from this direction. So as you're doing this, kind of think about your tie-ins. You may need to extend the project. Maybe you only need 15 feet of root wads, but in order to get a really good tie-in spot, you may need to go another 20 to 25 feet. So kind of think that in mind. I'll go into another tow protection, and it's the coir logs. Coir logs are made of coconut fiber wrapped in a biodegradable netting. They stabilize the toe of the slope. They don't require heavy equipment. They do allow time for plants to grow, as they do eventually break down. In Alaska, I think we've seen them last from anywhere from a couple years up to like 10 years. And then they do come in different sizes that can be selected. So you can have like a 12-inch coir log, an 18, and a 20-inch coir log, I believe, depending on what bank height you need. So in this case, you can see they had root wads, but they needed to continue on. Instead of continuing on with root wads, because the root wads were no longer needed, they just used a coir log and went back and put some trenched willows in behind this coir log. One thing I like to point out is to look and see that this coir log is actually entrenched in the soil, which means they just dug a hole about half the height of the coir log. So if this is a 12-inch coir log, it's sitting in a trench that's about 6 inches deep. And then they alternated the wooden stakes. And one of the reasons why it's important to entrench your coir log is because with frost heaving, you do get some jacking here and there. The other important thing when staking these coir logs is to use a 2x4 that's cut diagonally. That just helps prevent that coir log or any other material from really coming off, because it can't, because as it gets higher, the material gets higher, it just gets wider, that stake gets wider. So I'll go on to trenched willows here. Coir logs are the foundation for a lot of what bank stabilizations we do. So I'm just going to kind of build on from here. So in this photo, you'll see side view photo of our coir log, our stakes, and then trenched willows behind. we use dormant willows that are planted landward of the coir log at a 45-degree angle. Felt leaf willows are usually the best willows to use. They grow quicker, they get taller, they're just really hardy willows. Emily and I have discovered that really making sure that your coir log is at a 45-degree angle, or not your coir log, excuse me, your willows are at a 45-degree angle really helps with survivability. If you do have a high water event the first year or so, it at least gives them an advantage to kind of get a few stems up and out of the water. The other thing to note about planting these willows is that you want them about 15 stems per linear foot. And that when you're doing trenched willows, you will need to kind of trim back the willows. You'd want about 2/3 of the willow stem underground and about 1/3 out of the ground. So here's a photo from the Kenai here. We're looking upriver. This landowner just needed, she had bought the property and the previous landowner had done some bioengineering and it just stopped. And so this kind of all eroded back here. So the new landowner decided they needed to do something. And so an easy solution for us was to install trenched willows. There is a coir log here, however, you can't see it because we have placed cabled spruce trees in front of the coir log. The other thing here to note is we do have vegetative mat, and there's a few other issues with the hill slope here. So we have planted potted alders and some hydro seed. The really important thing, as Emily mentioned before, is watering. For the first couple of years, you just need to really water the plants. They need to get really good deep soaking water. This landowner, knowing that they live in Anchorage and they come down to Kenai on the weekends, they actually set up timers on sprinklers on timers. So their vegetation and their trenched willows was getting watered constantly. So one of my predecessors actually had some funding in the Matsu Valley, and they went through to help with culverts, replanting around culverts. So typically you get a new fish passage, a culvert in place, and they would just leave, you know, your rocks here, it's at the slope they want, throw a little hydro seed and walk away. Well, you've got really good fish habitat back here, but it's not so good here. And so what my coworker ended up doing was going through and helping get some of these replanted. So she ended up putting soil down in a lot of these, doing trenched willows. So here's a row of trenched willows on this one, and then a vegetative mat that was installed. I wish I had some pictures later on. I just don't know which culverts these are because they have really grown in and it's hard to see them now. Kind of another example here. We've got, again, the culvert was installed and just rock was kind of left here. Again, if you think about fish and what they need cover from predators. They need to have kind of cooler temperatures in the stream. And so in this area, they're wide open for prey, for birds. This part of the stream is getting really hot. When you can kind of look back here, it's a little shaded. There's more cover from predators. So again, this is one where she just went in, put in trenched willows and really good vegetative mat. The other thing is she removed, there was still like BMPs. So straw wattles were still left in these sites. So she was able to kind of get rid of some of the straw wattles as these sites, I think the swips had closed or the swips were close to being closed. I'm not 100% sure, but as you can tell immediately in this, that it's just made this particular channel a lot friendlier for fish. So kind of the last technique that I'll be going over is brush layers. Again, this is a side view of brush layers. So you've got the coir log, got your first layer of willows, and just note when you do brush layers, you always have a lower row of willows and then a second row of willows. So if you have 3 or 2 brush layers like this is showing, you're going to have 3 rows of willows. And again, you're using these dormant willows, and like we said, felt leaf is the best. And on all 3 of these, you want to make sure all the willows are at a 45-degree angle. You're looking at having 2/3 buried below ground and 1/3 above ground. So you're going to want to use we've got like a peat sand mixture. We've got, or native alluvial alluvial sediment. We have said maybe like 1 inch minus as your lift. So this is your soil is inside here, and these are 2 biodegradable fabrics is what make up your lift. One thing to note, your lift shouldn't be any taller than 18 inches. If you get them any taller than 18 inches, they kind of become unstable, and you don't want that. But you are expecting some settling to occur. So you can expect like 3 inches for it to kind of get about 3 inches smaller. And then one thing to note, just because you've put like a peat sand mixture or whatever your fill happens to be here, you need to also add topsoil in between. So mix topsoil in with your willow stems. Here's just kind of a quick case study. Again, this is a Kenai River. Landowner definitely has had some erosional issues. And so we did a workshop on their property, and it was brush layer. So in this case, you can see we've got the Coir log installed. You can see these willows are going in at a very nice 45-degree angle. So once they got the first layer in, which is down here, they did their brush layer with the 2 biodegradable fabrics, and they got a second row of willows on. These 2 people are cutting the willows back, and then we've got people adding topsoil on top of these willows here. Here's kind of what it looks like once this has been complete. This area is now ready for a vegetative mat to come in and be installed. So again, you've got your Coir log, your first row of willows, your soil lift, and then your second row of willows. In this case, they were able to get the skid steer fairly close to the project site, but couldn't get it all the way down. So people are actually just hacking up the veg mat and putting it down on the ground. So here's kind of what it looks like finished. You can kind of make out the Coir log here. First row of willows, your soil lift, second row, and then your vegetative mat on top. Kind of some more examples. So this is Willow Creek. As you can tell, this landowner had pretty steep bank. Again, there was another workshop class done here, and what they ended up doing was sloping the bank back here. And again, as you probably know, like a 2-to-1 slope is a lot easier to work with and more stable than like a 1-to-1. So the workshop came in, they did a brush layer, and they put some cabled spruce trees in, and then they added a whole bunch of vegetative mat. So here's what it looks like 1 year later. And you can see we do have some willows kind of growing here and there. And then this is what it looks like 3 years later. Here's another example on Wasilla Lake. So these techniques can be used both, like brush layers and trench willows can be used in lakes along with small systems. And in this area is where everyone comes to swim. And so the park decided to try to get something done here. Note, you'll see right here, we've got the willow bundles actually soaking in water. It's actually really good to soak your willow bundles for 24 to 48 hours at minimum. The longer you can get them soaked, the better survivability they have. Here's what it looks in 2019. So 9 years later, these willows have taken off. They had some really robust vegetative mat. They put up a fence to keep people from walking on it. And they also had a youth groups kind of come back through and do a few other things, such as planting some more willows. When I actually took this picture, I didn't realize there was a family of mergansers like sitting right here staring at me until the mom came out and started making noise at me. So these are really good for wildlife, not just fish, but birds and other wildlife. Here's another fish passage culvert. So this one was actually a fish passage. It was replaced in 2015. My predecessor worked with, I believe it was the Matsu Borough, and they decided they would use the 4 corners here as workshop sites. Again, we've got the BMPs kind of left in place here. This is my soapbox, is to kind of remove BMPs once everything's stable, because I hate seeing them left all over the place. But I'm just going to kind of keep an eye on this corner. So in this case, it was a workshop. We did a Coir log around it, 1 brush layer, potted alders, and then a special type of hydroseed was used. So this is what it looks like in 2019. And this is, again, one of the sites that people do come down, walk and fish, especially local kids. So kind of keep that in mind as you're working on these projects, especially if you can prevent people from walking on them, especially the first couple of years. That's really great. Understanding, though, that lots of times at these fish passage, you can't always stop the public from walking on them. So here's a workshop site in Willow that we actually did a couple brush layers. This is what it looked like before, that morning before we started, and this is what it looked like in the afternoon after everyone had left. We've got a coir log, one brush layer, and then more willows, and then a vegetative mat. I like showing this one because this is Willow State Recreation Area, the confluence of Willow Creek and the Susitna River. So it is a heavily utilized and fished location. And this is what we ended up with. So we did that late May, and by July 30th, when all the fish were starting to come in, people had tore down our fencing. They had crawled over with their coolers or walking up and down our vegetative mat using the lifts to walk up and down. So by end of August, you couldn't tell that we even had a veg mat. A lot of our willows didn't survive just because people were walking on them and they happened to sustain some high water. So a year later, June of 2019, we got some willows to come back survive. We've got some grasses starting to come up. And then September of 2020, you can't even tell there's vegetative mat, but we still do have some willows surviving. So in this case, it would have been good to think about maybe we need to add some access stairs into the creek, or start thinking about, this is a heavily used area. How can we best manage and protect our bioengineering that we just installed? Yep, so I think it's back to you, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Yeah, I'll kind of bring us home here with the last few slides. And Jess referred often to vegetative mat, but I'd like to share a little bit more information about that particular technique. It's akin to sod. It's a common in sod, which is common in turf grass establishment. But the key difference for us is that vegetative mat is a harvesting of native vegetation, including root mass and soils, and it's harvested for installation at an alternate location. So oftentimes we try to harvest the mat at the project site as soon as possible to installation, but never harvest within 50 feet of a water body. And we certainly always try to ensure that the vegetative mat is free of invasive species to prevent any inadvertent spread to a new project. A big benefit that if it's installed and properly cared for, the veg mat establishes quickly, and it really kickstarts the soil stabilization process. It is pretty tough to harvest veg mat by hand. So these photos show the use of a small skid steer to harvest and move the veg mat. But take note, when you look at what's being harvested, these particular veg mats include a large amount of not only the root mass in the soil, but also both woody and herbaceous plants. Next slide, please. So this quick illustration is just to drive home, again, the point of harvesting the veg mat and including at least 6 inches of root mass and soil when doing the harvesting. On many sites, it's appropriate to have your mat include woody and herbaceous plants, but this may vary depending on your site and location. The example that Jess gave of a project in Fairbanks that was predominantly grass, that's actually can be just fine. The root mass associated with healthy stands of grass is pretty phenomenal. And then depending on your situation, if you can have woody root mass involved with your stream bank stabilization, it just further adds to that resilience. Next soil, please. Next, next slide, not next soil. Last technique that we want to talk to you about today is hydroseeding. And we mentioned this a couple times earlier in the talk too, but hydroseeding is a planting process that uses a wet slurry of mulch and seed. And occasionally it also includes a spray on topsoil or fertilizer. So the slurry is sprayed onto a disturbed area as an alternative to traditional broadcasting or dry seed sowing. Hydroseeding is valuable in that the slurry protects and holds the seeds and soils early on. It helps keep moisture in, and it jump-starts the establishment process. And it's also relatively cost-effective when revegetating large areas. Most types of native grass can be applied via hydroseeding, including a few forbs, though admittedly we have quite a bit to learn about native forb establishment with this method. As mentioned with all of the other techniques, post-application care is critical, especially in hot or dry sites. Note that hydroseeding is not recommended over newly planted trees, willow stakes, trenched willows, or any potted plantings as well. And fertilizer is not allowable when hydroseeding near water bodies. And also with this technique, we have had issues with invasive species being present in purchased seed mixes. So it's imperative to take special care to ensure that your seed mix is clean before it is used at your project site. Next slide, please. So I don't want you to worry about trying to digest the information on this slide, but this is more to serve as a placeholder to let you know that a really exciting resource is in development. The newest revision to the Alaska Streambank and Revegetation Guide is in the works. And there's an addition to this upcoming revision that includes this particular table, which has a listing of species recommended for revegetation, where they can be used within the state, and also some other information about the species like shade tolerance, for example, and also commercial availability. So just keep your eyes out and ears to the ground for when that guide becomes available, and this will be in addition to the guide that should be pretty useful for folks across the state. Next slide. Okay, so if you are interested in a deep dive into the techniques we talked about today and the many that we did not talk about today, we invite you to participate in one of the 3 Streambank workshops that are held each year. So this slide has information about the 2 that are planned for this spring. We will be having a Zoom-based classroom portion, and then we'll have 2 field days where we'll actually get together and install a project on a section of Streambank. So one of the installations will be on the Kenai Peninsula, and the other will be in the Matsu region at Big Lake. And then there's also a workshop that's held in Fairbanks, usually in August, that does the exact same thing, has a classroom portion and also has a field portion where a project is installed. And next and last slide, please. So it was great to spend the last 40 minutes or 50 minutes or so with you. I think here's our contact information. I think I can speak for Jess, and also certainly myself. We're happy to answer any questions via email or phone call. We have a little bit of time to answer questions now as well.